Well, now think of Beatrix Potter and her tales of Peter Rabbit, Jemima Puddle Duck and Mrs Tiggy Winkle most probably spring to mind. Potter's popular stories with their country garden settings and recognisable illustrations have been entrenched in British children's bookshelves over this past century. Yet the stories may not be as British as we may believe. Dr Emily Zobel Marshall, in a recent essay, suggested there should be greater acknowledgement of the debt Potter owed to the Brer Rabbit stories told by enslaved Africans working on American plantations, claiming for far too long they have been stealing from his briar patch. Well, the Beatrix Potter Society has come out and defended the author against the claims that she lifted her most famous stories from African folk tales and concealed the sources. Joining me now to discuss this is cultural historian and lecturer at the University of Leeds, Dr Philip Kiszely. Philip, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. Well, this is just the latest, isn't it, in an attack on some of our most beloved literature, and it's pretty joyless as well, isn't it?
Yeah, well, first off, it's lovely to speak to you, Arlene. Yeah, I'm surprised that the moralising thought police have come onto this so late, actually. She mentions the African stories in her letters. Her family have connections with cotton, and they're sleeping on the job. You know, their one role in life is to complain about everything, and they can't even do that properly. I mean, the reason I say that is because, and I'm not singling out a particular scholar here. I'm talking about a trend, and it is a trend. And like
it is a trend.
It's vacuous, it's shallow, and it's also contemptible as well. So I think we have to treat it as such, and we have to send it up. But also, it really isn't about social justice. It's just about destroying British culture. It's about cancelling British literature. Because if it was about social justice, I've said this before, but if it was about social justice, these people would be interested in slavery that's going on, which is alive and unfortunately well in Africa right now, slavery in the Middle East. They'd be concerned about the Uyghur Muslims in China. But if you think about it, what's easier to attack? Peter Rabbit or the Chinese Communist Party? You're going to go for Peter Rabbit, aren't you?
Yeah. Look, I couldn't agree with you more. These cultural warriors are looking, digging around, trying to destroy beloved literature. And as I've said, you couldn't get more British, the countryside, the way in which she told the stories, and Beatrix Potter. And I mean, I think, as you have rightly said, she never hid the fact that she was taking her inspiration from a range of sources, including Brer Rabbit. So it is very much a political agenda, isn't it? But I mean, how do we stop this continuous attack on some of our beloved literature?
Well, I suppose we have to point out the ludicrousness of it, and we have to point. I think you already called it joyless, didn't you? And I think that's how we deal with it. But I think we have to say, look, culture is about sharing, it's about influencing, it's about referencing, it's about adaptation. Culture is generally appropriation. That's how we grow. It's called creativity. And I don't want to live in a world that is devoid of creativity, that's devoid of sharing, for all of these ridiculously made-up reasons that change day after day. It's almost like a kind of cultural mental illness or a cultural instability. They know the rules because they're making them all up, but we just look on aghast. So I think it's pushing back in that way and making it out for the kind of ludicrousness that it is. Yeah,
yeah. And I mean, I think the point you're making is a very powerful one, that we do, of course, look across and take inspiration from a wide variety of places wherever we visit and whatever we read. But we're not, I mean, as you rightly say, the rules are being changed all of the time. I mean, the allegation here is that she hasn't given enough acknowledgement to the African background. I mean, my goodness, where does this end? I have to say, I mean, I don't want to be depressive, but it really does get you down when this is a daily occurrence now.
Yeah, Arlene, I think the point is it doesn't end, and we have to really push back and make it end. I think, you know, it's going to come to a stage where we say, look, let them have their ghastly idea of what culture is, and we'll keep ours. You know, we'll conserve our past. I know which is the better one. And by we, I mean sensible people of all colours. It seems to me that you've just said that there's one rule for them and one rule for us. So the rule for us is English British history and how we destroy that, and the rule for everybody else is there is just no criticality for anybody else, especially the global south. You know, and the final point I think which is important and which I would like to make is that these folk tales don't belong to Africa. There are similar versions right across the globe, on all continents. And Vladimir Prop, the literary folklorist Vladimir Prop, was telling us this in 1928. It's no different now.
Yeah. Well, Philip, thank you so much for coming on and for having that conversation about the wonderful works of Beatrix Potter.